How long would it take for our modern civilization to totally decompose and cease to exist? Actually, the answer might shock you because it's not that long. And it is interesting because in this channel we are talking about lost civilizations and stuff like that, and many people ask where are the direct remnants from those advanced civilizations of deep antiquity or even prehistory. But as we'll see in this episode, the time of decomposition of certain materials is not that long, and if there existed an advanced civilization in the very distant past, many of its advanced remnants, for example technologies, would not last to this day, and that's why, as we'll see, only megaliths survived. My name is Alexander, and in this episode we shall talk about the decomposition of our modern civilization and periods in which any remnants of advanced and modern societies could actually totally cease to exist. It is very interesting because, as we'll see, this time of decomposition of many modern material is very short, relatively short, with, for example, comparison to the ancient monuments which are still there after several millennia. And let's start with the modern materials. Let's start with plastics. We know that most of man-made products nowadays is made out of plastic, and plastics dominate our day-to-day lives. And plastics actually, because in the media we are threatened that don't throw away plastic because it takes so long for it to decompose, but actually it is only long from our own perspective and from the perspective of lost civilizations, which, according to several texts which I'm talking about on this channel and which will be covered in my book Deja Vu, has everything already been, which I am finishing translating into English because it's actually in Polish because I'm from Poland, and it will soon available on Amazon. So in the perspective of lost civilizations, this time of decomposition of, for instance, plastic is very short, because according to several scientists, to several data I found, the decomposition time of plastic would be from about a few hundred to up to 1,000 years. And it isn't that long. For instance, let's imagine that in 3100 or 3200 AD, there would be almost no traces of plastic. Of course, there maybe would be some traces of the plastics in the oceans, or for instance in fish, because microplastics are getting into bodies of sea animals. But as we see, it's very short period of time, and if, for instance, in the ancient times people were to use plastics, most of it wouldn't survive to this day. This is very interesting because, as we know, plastics are made out of oil, they're manufactured in a special way, but for instance in ancient Mesopotamia, asphalt and oil were also used, for instance for boats, to not allow them to sink in water, because asphalt, helps to fill out the gaps in the boats. And this asphalt was also specially refined, was specially manufactured in special ovens. So why also couldn't our ancient Mesopotamian ancestors use, for instance, other manufactured plastics, like modern plastics? Why shouldn't they use, for instance, the plastic bottles, etc.? Of course they could, but if they really did that, we wouldn't have any remains in the modern era to actually dig out. And let's go with the other day-to-day use materials which we use in the modern world, for instance metals. And metals are eroding, are corroding in millimeters per year, so depending on the heaviness and on the size of certain material, of certain metal, of course also it depends on the metal. For example, is this an alloy or any other metal? So the bigger the piece of metal, the longer it would take it for decompose, but actually after a few thousand years we wouldn't be able to distinguish this metal because it would be eroded and corroded to such a way damaged that we wouldn't be able to distinguish if it was just some, you know, scrap piece of metal, or was it a car or any other like vehicle or advanced thing we use nowadays. So it's also very interesting. And the longest lasting material that we use nowadays would be glass. And this is interesting because glass is actually manufactured in a very, not in a much way, and the least the manufactured the piece is, the more it survives. So as we saw, the plastics were most manufactured, so they would last much shorter, and metals and glass, because it is made out of quartz, out of sun, would last very long periods of time, even up to 10,000 years. And of course, our modern society wouldn't vanish in about 1,000 or 2,000 years, because we've got also other things, like for example the ozone layer, the global warming, or the just some satellites and other cosmic vehicles that are, you know, in space, which wouldn't decompose that fast, because in space there is the vacuum and there is no oxygen, and oxygen and microbes are mainly responsible for decomposition. But if in the very deep antiquity or prehistory there existed a civilization just on the level of, let's say, the Industrial Revolution, so we know there would be the trains, there would be first, let's say, locomotive powers, first engines, and the, let's say, sciences were developed, but there wouldn't be plastics and any modern technologies like computers, etc. Then civilization of such level, so the level of Industrial Revolution, wouldn't survive that much. And if such a civilization existed in the very ancient past, for instance, a few thousand years ago, actually those engines and most of this technology wouldn't exist till nowadays, and there would be no traces of it at all. So it is very interesting because such a civilization could have existed. We know, for instance, on this channel we talk about Lemuria, Mu, or the Plato's Atlantis, which were to exist before about 9,600 BC, so 11 to 12,000 years ago. So during this 11-12,000 years, all of those remains would totally decompose, and till nowadays there only would last those megalithic buildings, because megalithic buildings are, you know, just stones put in a specific way, and stones are natural, and stones naturally erode in, let's say, hundreds of thousands to up to million years. So the buildings and monuments made out of stone would last very long, and that's why I think till nowadays we've got only the remains of megalithic stone buildings, and that's why I think we do not have any advanced technology that maybe I think existed in the very distant past. And we do not talk about, let's say, the space age technology, but, you know, just some technology that enabled our ancient ancestors to achieve all of that knowledge, because our ancient ancestors had very profound knowledge, not only about the building and cutting the stones to erect such monuments, but also the knowledge of mathematics, of astronomy, and many other phenomena. So as we see, our civilization would decompose in a relatively short period of time, and in the very distant past there could exist an advanced civilization on the level, let's say, of Industrial Revolution, or who knows, even maybe higher. That would be all for today. If so, don't forget to like to this video and subscribe to my channel, on which I talk a lot about several different topics, for instance, ancient lost civilization, spirituality, and many others. Also, if you're interested in some reading, I am finishing, as I mentioned, translating my book, but also I've got a short guide on the alignment of the Giza pyramid, so if you're interested, go and check out the link below. That will be all for today. Thank you, and till the next video. Goodbye.